Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm your host, Lisa Oligas. In this edition, we talk making community connections with those involved in economic development. We're discussing the role of industrial parks in bringing business and industry to town. Joining us to begin the conversation is Jeff Meredith, who serves as Chief Executive Officer for the Carthage Economic Development Corporation. Welcome, Jeff. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for hosting me, Lisa.
So you've got a big deal going on. You're getting ready to try and build a new industrial park in Carthage. So tell us where you are in the process. I know a grant is a big part of this.
So where we're at in the process, and this process started on my absolute first day on the job in Carthage. Had a board meeting and decided that there was a grant available from the state of Missouri and we should apply for it. What started off as potentially $1 million project became a $5 million project. And so we found out in April we were approved for the grant. And we do anticipate closing on that land sometime probably in July or August. It's about 250 acres. It is located at exit 50 off of I-49. And it's very close to the highway, and that's kind of where we're at in the process first.
So for people's reference points, near Mercy Hospital, and really it's property that was part of the Precious Moments family's property. So the Butcher family owns this property, correct?
Yes, currently the Butcher family owns the property. It is an easy way to look. If you stand in Mercy's parking lot and kind of look to the southwest, that is the land that we are planning to acquire.
So give us an idea of what it takes then to develop an industrial park. I mean, right now you have to be starting with infrastructure because this is green space, right?
Yes.
So tell us when you're looking at that, why is this a good space? It's basically land that hasn't had anything on it, correct?
Sure. So part of the advantage to a green space, or a green field, as they call it in the industry, is that you know what you're dealing with. There's not the other side of a green field is what's known as a brown field. And that's basically what people would think of as maybe a potentially contaminated site. Maybe there's some environmental issues there, maybe there's not, but the fear of environmental issues are going to keep people away from looking at it. Whereas with greenfield, you know you're starting from a baseline. And the reason why greenfield is frequently better than brownfield honestly has to do with the timeline. If someone's looking to set up in your community, they want to have deadlines on what they're trying to reach and be operational by within a certain period. And if you do not have to deal with environmental cleanup or the remediation process and all of the controls and things the EPA puts in place as you do those sorts of things, it makes your timeline shorter and allows you to open faster.
I mean, that could create, you'd have obstacles of you'd have to do soil testing, water testing. I mean, there could be a lot of added expense as well if you had a field that had already been used somewhere for something else.
Yes, absolutely. You're going to have some of those things that have to be done if you are looking at brownfield. And even for this land that we are fairly certain has always been used for agriculture, we are still planning to have a phase 1 study, which is basically where you have people come in and they look at what the usage of the property was before, and just kind of determine that there is no reason to do a phase 2, which is where they actually look to remediate or clean up basically the dirty stuff that was left behind.
So with 250 acres, what's the potential, or how many businesses or industries could you locate there? I guess kind of depends on the size, but what would be kind of the ideal?
Well, I mean, we had a discussion today, and even if we start selling off 50-acre tracts of land, then obviously you're going to have about 5 businesses that can put there. I mean, you're going to lose some land, and of that 250, we already account for about 12 acres that's gone immediately just because of stormwater retention. And as you start to look into that, so really the 250 probably comes closer to 200. So we could get 3 or 4 good-sized operations in there. And then once we have those, and that enables us actually to move further south and then acquire additional land that is also owned by the Butcher family.
So there's opportunity for expansion as well?
Oh, absolutely. The total tract of land that we're looking at is about 700 acres.
Oh, wow.
The 250 was what we had the ability to finance at this point in time. And we've even had the discussion of, after our first land sale, there's 50 acres we identified is going to be our next purchase because that kind of rounds out our sort of area, and then we move south once we move on from that.
So what's the benefit of, I mean, you said it's local and close to the interstate. What is the benefit of being so close to an interstate?
So, and close to the interstate, it is very close to the interstate. I mean, I-49 is probably about a half mile away from this, and there are the road doesn't exist right now, but there will be a truck route leading up to Fur Road and then accessing that. So for any business that moves or stores freight, being close to the interstate is a key factor because freight moves across the country, and Carthage is about 200 miles from the geographical center of the United States. And with I-49 being about a mile away, and then if you head south 5 miles, there's I-44.
Right.
So within 5 miles, you're connected to all of the coasts as well as both the north and southern borders.
So Carthage has industries right now. I mean, it has, the cheese plant, it has a lot of poultry plants. A lot of those are located actually like north of downtown in what you've told me is called the Bottoms.
Yes.
Why not expand that area, or could it not be expanded?
So the industrial bottoms, there's not a lot of opportunity for expansion there. It's mostly landlocked. Now there are some advantages to the industrial bottoms in that there is rail service that runs near there, but adjacent to the rail service is also floodplains.
Yeah.
So now you have to deal with trying to build that up, and you can build up the land, but there again it gets back to the cost. And for a business who's not necessarily interested in being rail served, that's not as ideal. They're looking for the green and the trucks. I mean, and rail moves products across the country, but the first and last mile of every piece of warehouse is a truck.
Yeah. Are there certain kinds or types of industries that you guys will be looking for when you build this industrial park?
Sure. So for this park, and while we're definitely calling it an industrial park, we prefer to think of it as an economic park because industry tends to think of those heavy industries. You mentioned poultry. We're not necessarily trying to seek another Butterball or anything for this particular piece of land. We're looking more at some of your warehouse because you have less noise concerns, you have less smell concerns and things that you might have from other industries, and there are residences nearby.
And we've had in this region success with cold storage,
Correct.
multiple businesses that have grown in that regard. So do you see, have you had prospective companies looking to you to say, hey, we'd like to move to Carthage, but we need space?
So we've not had that specific of a discussion recently.
Yeah.
Now we've had people looking at Carthage in the past, but what happens now in the current economic development world, so we get requests for information. They come down from the state of Missouri. And so currently we have a couple different ones we're looking at, and they range from 50 to 300 acres. They have different requirements as far as their water, wastewater, and electrical needs. And so once we have this land and we can determine the price and what it's going to cost to put the infrastructure in, then I can more properly fill one of those out and know that we have a price for the land and that we can meet those electrical or water demands within their desired time frame.
So when you're talking electrical demands, I mean, would you create a substation there? Is it based on each individual industry that comes in, or will the land be developed to try and serve multiple industries?
So yes to all of those questions. So at some point we will certainly have to consider having Carthage Water and Electric put in a substation in this location. Again, electrical is above my pay grade, but I know that we can serve some industries. But if you're trying to develop a 700-acre industrial park, which is ultimately the long-term goal of this, there's not enough electrical need locally or even the capacity for the system right now.
Yeah, so there would have to be more
Yes.
added. And of course, that's a cost that you need to be able to tabulate when you know what kind of industries are coming.
Yes.
So a lot of industrial parks have spec buildings. Is that something you would consider, or are companies looking for spec buildings, or does it depend on the industry?
Sure. So long term, we might consider a spec building, which for those that are watching, that just means speculative. Basically, you're building it without having anyone who
Kind of a shell.
Exactly. You build a building and hope someone's going to come. So there's some advantage to that. There again, time to productivity. If you have a spec building and it meets their needs, then that's great.
Because they can move in, don't have
Correct.
to worry about building construction. They just bring in their stuff.
They can move in, they can finish it. We were talking earlier off camera about the Joplin tornado. There was a spec building that became East Middle School as a result of that. And they were able to finish that. So you can take a large building and make it into almost anything, and whatever that building may ultimately the goal is. So that does help you shorten that cycle to productivity. Now the negative to that is you've got to finance that spec building, and that becomes a challenge. And then maybe we're building 50-foot high walls and they want 60-foot high walls. Well, now we have a building that we've sunk a couple $1 million into and it's not usable. So we will certainly consider that as we get there. I would think if we start to get a lot of requests for existing real estate and we're not able to meet that because we don't have that building, then that would certainly push our hand some of that as far as looking at a spec building.
And then there are companies, some of them that want to design their own.
Correct.
So when you get those companies, or when you're trying to sell to those companies, how do you market this industrial park?
So I would market the industrial park once we have the infrastructure in place again. Is that it's an industrial park, it's flat land, it's located within 5 miles of 2 interstate highways, and it's available, and we have a qualified and quantified workforce able to meet any of those labor needs.
And how does an industrial park make a difference when it comes to creating jobs?
Well, whenever you start to look at communities, especially in economic development, you look at the primary jobs, which are jobs that effectively are taking money from outside your community and bringing back in your community. You mentioned cheese earlier. So Schreiber Foods, while they're based out of Green Bay, has a very large presence in Carthage. They are shipping cheese products across the nation and across the world, and so then we're making money off of those other communities, other areas of the country, as they're buying cheese from Carthage, and then that filters back.
Yeah.
So if you have jobs that are making products that, again, are nationwide, then that's actually growing from the wealth of the community. Versus if you talk about a local business or something that tends to serve that local area, you're basically just passing Carthage dollars back and forth amongst yourselves versus taking California dollars to supplement Carthage income.
All right. Well, this is very exciting. So what's the timeline of trying to get this all happening? Do you have a...
So I have goals and I have dreams. Sadly, reality is probably more to the fact. And economic development is a very slow-moving project. So even though we applied for the grant in February, found out in April, we most likely will not close on the land until July or August at the earliest. And I've had people say, well, when are we going to know that you've actually got the land? The only sign that most people are going to see is literally a sign on the land that says land available. Most likely will have my phone number, maybe my email address on there, as I will be trying to market that land. Beyond that, I mean, we have meetings. We will have lots of meetings in the background that nobody knows about, that nobody's invited to, as we talk through some of these things. So recently I had a meeting and I was talking with the water and the wastewater, and the person who's going to help facilitate the roads and the stormwater, just trying to envision how that land is going to be laid out. While we had a plan for the 700 acres, if you're only looking at 250, some of those plans have to change some.
Yes. Now you had the grant from the state, but you also have something from the Steadley Trust?
Correct. So the total funds, it was a total of $5 million project. We were able to get $1 million from the Steadley Trust. The Carthage Economic Development Corp was the applicant for that. The city of Carthage was actually the applicant for the grant from the Missouri Department of Economic Development. That was $1.5 million. The city has promised $1 million for this. And then Carthage Water and Electric Plant had $1.5 million that they're funding as well. And some of that, ultimately, they are actually buying land. They're just prepaying land as part of this because they know as Carthage moves to the south and to the west, they're going to need areas for some of that infrastructure, like a substation.
You bet.
And you got to have land to put it on.
Yeah. And lots of room to grow, at least in that area.
Oh, absolutely.
Excellent. All right. Well, Jeff Meredith, thanks for telling us all about it, and good luck in your project.
Thanks, Lisa.
When we come back, we will be joined by Travis Stevens, President and CEO of the Joplin Area Chamber of Commerce, talking about industrial parks working in Joplin, including the Crossroads Industrial Park, where we get a first-hand look at a success story with Ajinomoto Foods. Welcome back to Newsmakers. The Joplin Area Chamber of Commerce makes it part of its mission to grow business and industry in the community. The city's first industrial park is in tandem with Webb City on the north end of Joplin's Rangeline Road. The second is the Crossroads Industrial Park in the southeast corner of the city. At least 19 companies are featured as success stories on the Joplin Crossroads website, and today we're going to talk about that park and growing business with the Joplin Area Chamber of Commerce President and CEO, Travis Stevens. Thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here.
So how are things going in the Joplin area business-wise?
Yeah, things are going really well. They're almost going too well. And when I say that, it's because the big challenge we have right now is workforce. Our unemployment numbers are at all-time lows ever since they've been keeping track of unemployment. I mean, we're at historic numbers at 2.1% unemployment, which is just unheard of.
If somebody needs a job.
So if somebody needs a job, there's a job. It's great. That means everybody's working. The problem is companies that want to expand, bring more jobs, they're struggling because they need more people, they need more capacity.
And that's part of how you sell our city on industries. So industrial parks are not a new idea. We
Correct.
had one in North Joplin. It was on Enterprise Street or Enterprise Avenue. And so let's talk about that, but now Crossroads Industrial Park is in the southern part of the city.
Right.
How did the two differ?
Well, so the reason for Crossroads is because the Joplin Webb City Industrial Park filled up. So you only buy so much land. When it fills up, you got to go somewhere else. And at the time, I wasn't here, but they looked around and said, oh, there's plenty of available property over there. Let's see if we can acquire that. And Crossroads was born.
I did see a listing for the Joplin Webb City Park on Enterprise. So how many buildings, are there any available? Do they come and go? When when a structure is already there, does that make a difference as to how you court different businesses?
So at this point, everything in the Joplin Webb City Industrial Park has been sold off, all the land sites. So everything owned now is owned by private companies. If someone were to leave, then they would probably either broker something with a real estate developer and they would take care of that on their side. They may reach out to us just to let us know it's available. So if more prospects are looking and they contact the chamber, we can say, yes, we have a couple sites available. We'd love to share with you and show you. But that's, once our main goal is to really get the land sold and then a private company come in and build a facility on that spot. And at that point, our job is done.
So you also, though, have done in the past spec buildings. As in the world of development, in the world of industry, how important can a spec building be? Are there pros and cons to spec buildings?
Yes, so they were very popular 20, 30 years ago, and they probably lured a lot of companies into communities. However, in today's day and age, they're not so popular because you build one, you invest a tremendous amount of resources and capital into those, and then they may just sit there for a while.
Right.
And so a lot of companies have been burned because they sat there too long. Maybe they didn't feel like they got their investment back. They didn't do what they thought they were going to do. And so there's just kind of the shyness towards spec buildings because now everything's so virtual. They can schematic and see what one looks like and plant a virtual building in a site, and they can do that relatively easy.
So in the past, it was a way to say, here, look what we can do.
Correct.
But you can do that virtually now.
Right. And the other big problem is if you build a spec building, and let's say you build it 27 feet tall, and you get this really great prospect that wants to come to your community, oh, but they need 29-foot clearance on their ceilings, not 27. So you're stuck.
Right.
So it's almost better not to do that, just have the land site available. Now, if somebody were to vacate and a building were available, then you have something to work with, you have something to market. You're just hoping for the right client or prospect to come along that needs those specs.
And might need something in a hurry.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
So then let's talk about how many parcels are still available at the Crossroads Industrial Park.
So there are approximately 7, maybe 8 parcels available that range in between 2 acres all the way up to 55, 55 being the largest. We've got about 3 or 4 sites that are in that 10 to 12 acre range. And then our large premium site is 55 acres. So we're low on capacity, and we expect these to fill up probably in the next 2 to 3 years.
Really?
So it's time to look for more land.
Okay. I was going to ask that.
Yes.
Do we think we need to look toward either expanding that area there, or would you look at a whole other part of property in the Joplin area?
So I think the answer is yes. Wherever land is most readily available, and you just kind of consider the cost-benefit analysis. If you've got a great site over here, how much infrastructure is going to be required? How far away is it from other power lines and water lines? What's the topography look like? So I think the first wish would be to expand Crossroads and work our way around there because we are building out the infrastructure. However, you have to have owners willing to sell their land. And sometimes people, it's third generation, fourth generation, they don't want to part with their land. That's been in their family for years. So you just kind of have to figure out what's available and find the best route.
If you look at the Crossroads website, I know we also have some drone video, some of the parcels, it'll mention, say, a detention pond.
Right.
Why is it helpful to have some
Sure.
of that? I mean, obviously it's part of the advertisement and industries might need that.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. That's not one I get asked a lot. But so when you're thinking about 200,000 square foot facilities being constructed, where there was once just this pasture of green land, all that rain used to just permeate right there on the site. You put up a structure of 200,000 square feet of ceiling or rooftop and surrounded by concrete parking lot. All that water now is just flushed out somewhere else. And so to prevent it from just mass amounts of water just flowing downstream and encountering whatever is down the road, you build the detention ponds to hold the water on this premises and then let that slowly seep out or seep back into the ground. So it's just a requirement now for development, and it's easier for us to say, hey, we already have these detention ponds built out. So you, the developer or the company, you don't have to sacrifice any of your land that you're going to buy and build a detention pond on it.
And does that make a difference in bringing in maybe a big industry that might be a requirement for a big
Sure, it
property?
just lowers their cost of having to build out the site to what they want to see. So,
what are some things that are also helpful? Like I know rail access can be something at an industrial park. Also, I mean, we know we're close to the interstates. How important is that when you're trying to land companies and for this property?
So interstates are vital. We get, when companies are looking for new sites, they send out what's called an RFI, which stands for Request for Information. And in that, they will list anywhere between 30 to 100 of their criteria of what they're wanting to get out of this. And so they may say, how far are you from the interstate? How far, do you have this much water capacity? Do you have this much electric power? Is rail available? So I would say approximately 25% to 30%, we get the question, we have to be on rail. Do you have rail? So if we don't have any rail at Crossroads. We have another park that's privately owned, Wildwood Ranch in Joplin, that has rail. So if we get an RFI asking for rail, we know to submit a response for Wildwood, not Crossroads. And then for interstates, that's a big premium to be close. So
did it make a big difference when the Prigmore exit was added? It seemed like it was very close to range line, yet it's really catering to the industrial park, it would seem.
Yeah, absolutely. So anything we can do to make it more convenient for shipping lanes to open up, for less congestion, less traffic, multiple exits and endpoints. So companies look very favorably on that.
Do you have to do a lot with tax incentives? Is that something that becomes part of every industrial park project?
Yeah, incentives are, unfortunately, incentives are a necessary evil. So what happens is, let's say a John Deere tractor or a Toyota automaker wants to build a new facility. So they look around and they can really go anywhere. But what they try to do is they try to narrow it down to 2 or 3 or 4 communities that they really like. And then it becomes a matter of, okay, where's the most cost feasible location for us? Where are we going to be most productive? And in that, incentives make up a lot of the difference. So unfortunately, what happens is you get communities bidding on these companies, which works out well for the companies. You could argue, does it work out for the communities? But essentially, if you get down to 3 companies or 3 communities, and you're in different states, they're all going to probably put something on the table to say, hey, we want you here. So tax incentives in Missouri are the big tool that we have to use. They, where it gets sticky is if they're looking at communities, maybe they're looking at Joplin, but they're also looking at another Missouri community. So now we're on an equal playing field, and it's all about what can the local community do to make it more
And a lot of that has to do then with workforce.
Correct.
And a good working community and people who show up for work and have a good work ethic.
Yeah, so we like to say if a company ever is leading with wanting to know what the incentives are, that's probably not a good sign. You really want to make sure it's a fit for both the company and the community. First off, do we have the workforce? Do we have the infrastructure? Do we have everything you need to be successful here? And then at the end, we'll talk about those incentives to make sure we can close the deal.
On your Crossroads site, you have a lot of businesses that have been here for a really long time.
Sure.
Midland Paper, 1945, Algar Martin, 1954, Douglas Companies, 1973, and Bruner Industries, established in 1986. Does it help to have established businesses in an industrial park to kind of tell people, hey, this is a good place to be?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. So it's a lot like people. You don't want to be the first one. I mean, most people don't want to be the first one at the party or the first one somewhere, and there's this uneasiness, like, is this the right space?
Yeah.
Am I in the right place? I don't see any people that look kind of like me. So companies are the same way. They want to know if they're an industry, they want to see other industrials there. If they're an engineering firm, they'd love to see another engineering firm, and so on. So anything we can do to go ahead and fill out some space and let people know, yes, this is a successful place. Otherwise, that company wouldn't be here. Okay, that gives them the assurance. Okay, we can make it there too.
Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you so much for talking to us today. And
anytime.
Any big prospects
well,
that we should be looking for?
Sure, and I'll end with this and say that a lot of our activity right now is centered around expansion, so our existing industries, and I would just say that we are quite active in that area right now. They're all asking the same questions. If we expand, if we took on more capacity, could we fill those jobs? That's a struggle right now, but I think that's a really great testament to Joplin and the area.
That they want to grow here.
That they want to grow here, and knowing there's challenges with the workforce, but that tells me they're happy with the workforce. They're productive, they're profitable.
They're happy with the sites.
They're happy with the sites and locations, and they want to stay here. They're not looking to leave. So,
excellent.
But yes, we typically always have a few companies kicking the tires at the community and just scouting. So, but we're not allowed to speak to those until they're
ready. That's great. There's hope for more growth in the future.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you, Travis Stevens.
All right. Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks to our guests for sharing the latest on development of industrial parks, and thank you for watching Newsmakers. I'm Lisa Allegas.